In the summer of 2017, I was fishing the Oconaluftee River. On the edge of the Qualla boundary in North Carolina, I had good gear, a decent rod, a reel with fresh line, and a box of lures I had been rotating through for about 2 hours without a single bite. A man named Joseph was sitting on a flat rock about 40 yards downstream from me. He was over 80 years old. He had no rod. He had no reel. He had a length of monofilament wrapped around a piece of smooth hardwood, a small hook, a split shot, and a piece of inner bark he had pulled from a tulip poplar at the edge of the bank. In the time it took me to change lures twice, Joseph had caught 8 fish, rainbow trout, brown trout, 1 largemouth working the slower water near the bend. He released each one gently back into the current. I watched him for a few minutes before I walked over and said anything. When I got close enough, I could see he was not casting randomly. He was placing every single presentation at the same type of location. The exact edge where shadow from the tree line fell across the surface of the water. Not in the shade, not in the sunlit, open water. At the line where those 2 zones met, I asked him about it. He said his grandfather had shown him when he was a boy that the fish hold at the edge of things, not in the middle. He said the edge of shade and light is the most reliable fish location in any moving water in any season. And he had been fishing that edge his entire life. I did not fully understand what he meant right away, so I kept watching. He walked the bank slowly before he chose a spot. He was not looking at the water for depth or structure the way I had been taught. He was looking at where the shadow from the tree line fell across the surface. He placed his hand line at the precise edge of 3 different shade lines that morning. Every single presentation was at that same transition zone, not inside the shade, not in the open water. At the line where the 2 conditions met, I went back to my rod and started doing the same thing with my lures. Casting to shade edges instead of open water, I caught 4 fish in the next 30 minutes, in the same stretch of river where I had caught nothing for 2 hours before that. The gear was identical. The lures were the same. The only variable that changed was where I was presenting the bait. Here's the science that explains exactly what Joseph understood. Researchers at North Carolina State University published a study in 2013 that tracked the position of fish relative to shade features in freshwater environments. During daylight hours, 78% of fish across all species studied were holding within 15 feet of a defined shade line, not scattered randomly through the water column, stacked at the edge of the shade feature. The reason is biological and layered. Shade provides thermal regulation in warm months. Water in shade is measurably cooler than water in direct sun. A few feet away, fish are cold-blooded and position themselves at the temperature they function best in. The shade line is a thermal boundary, and fish sit on the cooler side of it. The shade edge also creates a visual advantage. A fish holding in shade can see clearly into the sunlit water in front of it, while a fish approaching from the sunlit side cannot see clearly into the shadow. The fish in the shade has the predatory advantage. It can detect the prey before the prey can detect it. The shade line also marks a current seam in most moving water situations, where a bank overhang or tree canopy creates the shadow. There's often a slight reduction in surface flow just inside that zone. That seam holds baitfish, which concentrates the predators hunting them. Shade feature, thermal edge. Visual advantage, current seam. All 4 conditions tend to converge in the same 15-foot zone. Every angler who has ever walked past a shaded bank to cast into open water has walked past the exact location where the fish were holding. Shade features are not a preference. They are a behavioral constant that holds across species season and water type. Scan the QR code in the top left corner or click the first link in the description. Inside the Angler's Vault, there's a complete module on reading water without electronics. How to identify productive locations from the bank before you ever make your first cast, including shade lines, current seams, depth transitions, and surface activity patterns. Plus, 7 more modules covering solunar theory, barometric pressure, and the complete annual fishing calendar with moon overlays for every month of the year. Stay here because the second method Joseph showed me works directly alongside shade lines, and the combination of the 2 is what produced 8 fish in the time I produced none. Most anglers learn one of these patterns by accident at some point in their fishing life. Joseph used both of them together every single time he went to the water. That is the difference between finding fish occasionally and finding them consistently. The second method Joseph used that morning was surface reading, and it works as a real-time targeting system on top of the shade line positioning. Before he placed any presentation, Joseph always looked at the surface for 30 seconds, not at the bottom, not at the depth, at the surface. What he was watching for were rings, concentric rings expanding outward from a single point on the surface. Not the rings from wind or current, the specific pattern of a ring produced by a fish making contact with the water surface, or by a bait fish disturbing the surface film while being pushed from below. Joseph showed me the difference between the two. A wind ring is irregular at the edges and drifts with the surface current. A fish ring is clean and nearly perfect in its circle. It expands evenly outward from a single fixed point, and it tells you something specific. A fish was active at that exact location within the last 30 seconds, not somewhere in that general area. At that point, when Joseph saw a ring form inside a shade line, he placed his presentation at that exact location within the next 2 casts. He was not guessing where a fish might be. He was placing bait where a fish had just demonstrated it was actively feeding. The setup he used to do this costs less than $4 total. A length of 8-pound monofilament, roughly the same length as your arm span, plus 2 feet, a size 6 hook, 1 small split-shot weight pinched onto the line about 8 inches above the hook, wrapped around a smooth piece of hardwood, or even a thick twig. No reel, no rod, no guides to worry about. The bait he used that morning was inner bark, stripped from a tulip poplar. He peeled a thin strip about the length of his finger from a tree at the bank edge, threaded it loosely on the hook so it moved naturally in the current. He said his grandfather called this reading what the river already has, the idea being that a fish already familiar with the insects and organisms in that water responds more readily to something that belongs there than to something manufactured elsewhere and shipped to a tackle shop. The Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation ran a field study in 2018, comparing handline fishing with conventional spinning rod setups. In identical water over 3-hour sessions across multiple sites and seasons, handline anglers averaged 4.7 fish per session. Spinning rod anglers in the same water averaged 1.8. The researchers noted several reasons for the gap. Handline presentation kept the bait closer to natural depth, with less line tension causing unnatural movement against the current. The direct connection between hand and hook allowed anglers to detect subtle contact that spinning rod users missed entirely because of slack in the line between rod tip and bait. And handline anglers repositioned their bait more frequently. Because there is no reel to retrieve and no casting arc to account for, you simply lift the line and lower it again 2 feet to the left. That speed of repositioning meant handline anglers were hitting more precise locations. And within the same amount of fishing time, Joseph had been doing this his entire life. The refinement was visible in every single placement he made that morning. Now here is the third technique that Joseph added in the last hour of that morning, the one he had not mentioned until he saw I was paying attention. He reached into the water near the bank, picked up 2 flat stones from the bottom and rubbed them together firmly for about 30 seconds underwater. Then he set them down and placed his bait directly in the disturbed water. I asked him what he was doing. He said, "The stones release small organisms when they are disturbed. Mayfly nymphs, water beetles, midge larvae. All of them get pushed off the rock surface when you rub 2 rocks together. They enter the water column as a small cloud of natural food, which pulls fish into that zone within minutes." I ran my own comparison over 14 fishing sessions. The following spring, sessions where I used the rock method alongside shade line positioning averaged 7.4 fish per 3 hours. Sessions in the same water without the rock technique averaged 4.1. The difference was not tackle, not lures, not conditions. A 30-second action with 2 free rocks pulled from the bottom of the same river. That is the complete system. Joseph showed me on the Oconaluftee in 2017. Shade line positioning, surface ring reading, rock organism release. $0 for the method. Less than $4 total if you want to set up the handline exactly as he had it, and if you want the full system for reading water and timing every trip you take. Inside the angler's vault, there is a complete reading water module. 8 total modules including salinity theory, barometric pressure, water temperature, and a full annual fishing calendar with moon overlays for every single month. Scan the QR code in the top left corner, or click the first link in the description. The complete system is inside the angler's vault.